recruiting is often a sales type function, where you are trying to attract people to come work for you. You're trying to sell them on, why they should want to come join your organization, being attractive to them in that way. And then as you get them interested, working them through a process to where you feel comfortable as well, with their ability to produce once they are hired. And so that's that's what the difficulty often is, especially in the world that we live in. We're trying to fix broken processes, and hiring and recruiting is one of those processes that tends to be very broken or very slow and often archaic in a lot of organizations, because it is that kind of dance of, I want you to come work for me, but I also need to prove that you are going to work well, and produce for our team. And so I need to go through these different steps, and those steps often take a long time.
You're listening to the Black to Business podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall.
And we're back. So today we're discussing all things hiring and recruiting, because here at Black to Business, we want the best for you and your business. And we also want to make sure that your business is filled with the right people. So maybe you've created a product or a service, you've started your business, and you're finally beginning to make a little money. Now it's time for you to start hiring your first employees. Figuring out who those people should be, however, well, that's sometimes easier said than done. With a never-ending to-do list, you might be anxious to hire quickly, but it's important not to rush through the process. You want to hire slowly and vet your candidates thoroughly. And if you don't have the time, you can always outsource. Today's episode is extra special because our guest today, along with his co-founders, actually have built an amazing software service to help recruiting teams hire great candidates faster than ever. And they're doing this by using one of the fastest phone interview experiences in the world. Like, such a true example of innovation and Black excellence, and we love to see it. Joining me today on the podcast is Darrian Mikell, CEO and founder at Qualifi. And today he's sharing his entrepreneurial journey and some ways to help you land and hire the best candidates for your business. Let's dive in. So Darrian, welcome to the Black to Business podcast. I'm excited that you are here, and I'm also excited about today's topic. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So I always like to start off with, I'm sure some people have heard of you before. Some of them are just hearing about you. So if you could just tell me a little bit about you, what is it that you do in your business, and how did you get where you are today?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Darrian Mikell. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Qualifi, and our kind of claim to fame is building the fastest phone interviews, or enabling the fastest phone interviews in the world. And we typically work with recruiters, talent leaders, oftentimes folks that are doing lots and lots of interviewing and recruiting, usually volume recruiters. And what we enable for them is the ability to pre-record audio-based questions so they can use their voice to create personal yet standardized interviews. And then from there, they're able to scale their activities by inviting, one person at a time, upwards of hundreds or thousands at a time, to be able to respond to these interview questions simply over the phone, over a standard phone call at their convenience. And so we capture the audio of those interviews. We also transcribe the responses and make it available to the recruiting team to listen to as soon as they get done. So it really speeds up the process, makes it more convenient for candidates, and allows recruiters to free up their time and get a lot more done in a day. And so, that's what we do. I got started with it because it was a pain point that I experienced myself. This is the first time for me leading a startup as a CEO, but I was also part of a leadership team at a previous startup, and a lot of my responsibilities was over the operations of the team. And a big chunk of that in the early days was leading recruiting and day-to-day HR responsibilities. And so, that's how I got started in this.
Well, that is an amazing story, an amazing platform. I'm so excited to talk more about it. But I also want to talk about, for those who are listening, they're in their startup journey. And I think that you would be the perfect person to start talking about your startup journey and just building a startup. So I want to talk about, for you, what do you feel what is a startup, and talk about the culture and environment that's different than, say, a bigger corporation versus a startup?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's tough to pinpoint exactly what a startup is. I think it's something that for us, it started with an idea, right? It's an idea of innovation, something new in the market, or expanding on a concept in the market, and with the ideas of moving really fast to prove and validate that idea and expand it to its greatest scale as fast as possible. So I think a lot of startups, or a lot of emphasis around startup world, startup life is going from small to big really fast. And that typically is around getting a proof of concept, validating an idea, and doing your best work in order to, again, expand that concept to more of the marketplace. And so that's what a lot of our work is about, is trying to move as fast as possible to prove what we do is valuable and get that in the hands of as many people as possible to continue that cycle of, hey, we have this idea, let's prove it out, let's get it to more people, let's have them validated, let's have them give us feedback, correct, iterate, and relaunch it out to them, relaunch it to more people, and continue to kind of push that snowball as fast as we can. And so I don't know if that's a great answer to that question, but I think it differs from, what might be other sorts of businesses like large corporations or even other small businesses where the emphasis isn't really on fast growth or fast validation. It's more about sustaining and building something that's centered around profitability. Startups are more geared around that speed element for sure.
And I love that you mentioned that about fast validation, because I think for so many of us, or just people who are listening, dealing with, staying stuck with an idea or just this thing that they're introducing. And like you said, it's kind of like being able to pivot, but still maintaining your values, your mission of why you started. So, how do you do that fast, versus, okay, this is something I'm tied to. This is something I know that we want to do. And I think this is what they need, so I'm going to keep going, versus, okay, we have to move quickly.
Yeah, it's a good question, because like a lot of, if you're in the world of startups, one of the things you find is just limited resources is kind of a nature of the game. And so in our early days, what it looks like, firsthand for us was some of that validation came from conversations, just talking to who could be our potential audience, so other recruiters, and just saying, hey, I have this idea, what do you think? And it starts there. You start getting ideas from that. And then you want to create something a little bit more tangible. So you start sketching, literally sketching ideas up. So I would draw up, what I envision this platform to look like, or what I envision the experience to look like. Those sketches became, digital. So basically a PDF of my sketches, and getting that in the hands of people, clickable prototypes that actually don't work. And so you kind of, again, building that snowball of, hey, like refining that idea until you have, what people refer to as like a minimum viable product. So the smallest version of what you envision that's usable in order to get real time feedback and real testing, and have it, in use in the world. So that's what it looks like in the early days. And for every company, it's going to look a little bit different. That was the nature of ours, because it is something that you can more easily envision and get behind. But other companies have different processes that they might go to get that validation from customers. But the best form of validation is getting people to pay for it, and then right. Proving that there is a market for it. And so that's one of the critical steps that you definitely want to check off in that early journey.
I love that, because one of the things I took away from when you said that is the fact that you were dealing with limited resources, and, building that MVP first before creating. So of course that saved you a lot of time and money. So for those who are listening, you know, you don't have to build out the full thing and then, you know, maybe wasting money.
Yes, that is definitely one of the things that I've learned, partially just because I'm cheap in nature. I don't like to spend a lot of money.
Frugal.
Yes, frugal. However you want. I kind of own it. You know, I own being frugal or cheap. It's just part of who I am. But that's one of the things that I hear a lot of, like maybe early people that are just wanting to get started in entrepreneurship or in startups, is thinking that they need to build the full platform to get started. And I would suggest that you do all that you can before you have to, you know, spend that money. Because, you know, hiring an individual, in our world, a software developer, a software development shop, or someone that's going to actually build that prototype, that one costs a lot of money, and they may end up building something that nobody's going to pay for in the first place. And so not only is it a lot of money, it could potentially be a complete waste of money and you're back to square one. So getting validation proof so that you have the confidence that you have, the confidence behind what you're doing to know that there is a market for it. And that when you do build that product, you're going to have hopefully you already have customers, you know, prepaid or lined up. But if not, you know that they will pay for it because you've received that validation in some sort of way.
Agreed. And Darrian, you have co-founders. So how did this come about, and how's it been working with, you know, co-founders?
Yeah, co-founders are a great way to get an idea off the ground. So I told you a little bit, like a taste of kind of how I got started with what we're doing now. My first co-founder in this business is actually my brother. So that's kind of for life. So yeah, he's my younger brother. And part of the reason that we got started is because he's an entrepreneur as well. You know, before we got a chance to work together, he was doing his own thing. He actually started a food truck while he was in college and had a lot of success with that. So I'm based in the Indianapolis area. He went to school in Southern Indiana, and him and his partner became like the first food truck in Terre Haute, which is a college town. And so they had a lot of success with that. And then in their off season, he was doing recruiting and managing a territory for an organization that provided at-home care to the elderly. And like I said, part of his responsibility was doing recruiting. And so we both had these shared pain points where the idea for Qualifi really resonated with him as well. And we got started on that together. And it's been a blast to get to work with him. But we're both not technical. And so we needed folks to help us get this off the ground. You know, we were actively working on the idea, you know, from a visual concept of what this could look like to getting validation from, you know, potential customers. And so we shared that load, but as we were building that validation, we needed to get something in the hands of these potential users so they can actually experience it and feel it for themselves. And so that's where our other two co-founders came into place. And the story in terms of how we are all connected is, like I said, me and my brother from birth, basically, or his birth at least. And then I mentioned my brother's food truck. Well, his business partner is also one of our co-founders. He's a self-taught developer and got started with us, you know, in the early days. And then the last one is actually he's kind of the oddball in terms of how we're connected, but he's probably the most experienced in the tech world. He's an engineer himself, and we actually met just on LinkedIn. I knew kind of what we needed in terms of technical talent, and I threw some keywords in a LinkedIn search, and he was one of a few people that popped up in our local area, and reached out to him and a few others, and he was just the one and only that responded. But when we got coffee, we really hit it off. He liked what we were doing, and he was down to work with us. And so we all got started and kind of been rolling ever since. And that was at least a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago. So it's really, fortunate in how it all worked out and that we work really well together.
Well, speaking of, because speaking of working well together. So one, I'm sure there are people who are listening who want to go into, partnerships or not do it alone. And how has it been working, one, with a family member, but then two, working with a team of, just a team in general? How do you all balance your relationship and maybe like who does what, figuring that out, who's best at what? So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's an important conversation, because in the nature of startups, roles shift and change over time. Like we've, even to this day, still have conversations about like where we're going to be a best fit. We're hiring folks on our team right now. And so effectively some of the things that we used to own, someone else is going to own soon. So it means that we get to shift into other aspects of the business and start to take on things. So just always having that conversation and openness to be in alignment with each other. And also understand like, hey, where do I want to be in this company? Where's my skill set best aligned for what we need in this company? So that's one thing, is just keeping that open dialogue, throughout every phase of the business. Especially as founders, we need to stay in alignment, because it's going to affect the rest of the team, from a management standpoint, and just kind of an overall team dynamics and morale standpoint as well. So that openness and that dialogue is necessary. And then just in general, as we build our team, like what we try to be is people first, as opposed to just focusing solely on the work, understanding that work is an important part of your overall life, but it's only one aspect of your life. And so caring about the person first is really, really important to us. But yeah, happy to dig in there more. I don't know if I answered your question there fully, but yeah.
You did. That's good. And I agree. People first. I love that. So let's talk about money. And you all have this robust platform and this robust service that is providing the solution. How did you come about, supporting this, whether it came from funding, your own bootstrapping, and outline some of the different sources of funding that you've been able to have access to?
Yeah, for sure. So this is funny and not necessarily recommended, but when I first got started with Qualifi, it was during a really tough period for me, personally and professionally. Like Qualifi was a concept and it wasn't, fully a business. We didn't have any customers, and yet I found myself with this being like my main option to, going full time. And so there's a good, I think half a year where I wasn't paying myself, and basically didn't have an income. So the earliest days, luckily software can be cheap to create, in the early days, but, supporting it through just, credit card debt. And that's not, like I said, definitely not recommended, but, it was enough to kind of keep the steam going, and keep things afloat while we were getting started. But when things started to pick up, we were able to get some early customers, and early customers led to belief in terms of venture capital and angel investors. And so we were able to start to string along angel checks up until earlier this year, where we actually closed a pre-seed round, and also got into Techstars, the accelerator. And so those are some critical moments for us as a company, because it meant that we could all come full time as founders, then we could start building out the team as well. And so now over this year, we really started to grow and leading into an upcoming funding round as well. And throughout that process, we've also been able to have access to some like non-dilutive funding as well. Essentially funding that doesn't dilute our ownership as founders. We were able to get that by winning a pitch competition and placing in a couple of other pitch competitions that had a prize attached to that. So those were really awesome to be a part of as well. But those are the main elements, and the dynamics in terms of learning how to raise money from investors is really difficult for a first-time founder. And I feel one of the more critical steps in my personal journey was going through Techstars and learning, what it looks like to run a really great investment process with investors. And so, yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of nuances, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of show to it. There's a lot of performance art to raising money, but there's some critical things that you need to have in place that you want to be prepared for going into it. That can really, change the outcomes of, your ability to raise money. Because that is a critical step for a lot of, not necessarily every startup needs to raise money, but for a lot that do, raising money is a critical function of being able to bring to life what you envision.
Any tips on those who are listening to be prepared, some of the things that they should do, and to know if that raising funding is right for them? Because that is one of the things we don't talk about a lot, I think, on the show. And I want to talk about more because I know people are interested in getting funding.
Yeah, absolutely. So it looks different. What I would say, if you are interested in raising money, one, knowing whether or not your business lends itself to raising money typically is if there's a bigger market opportunity. A lot of investors, not necessarily every investor, but a lot of investors look for the potential for your business to sell for $1 billion plus, which typically means earning revenues, the potential to earn revenues, in the hundreds of millions. And so understanding how big is the market you're going after is kind of a key one. And so knowing that you have a large market opportunity as a business is kind of one of the checkpoints to know whether or not venture capital makes sense for you. Not the only checkpoint, but one of them. And if it is, I would say one of the things I learned is to be really targeted. Treat raising money from investors as a sales function. So in sales, the persona of the customer that you're going after. And the same applies in the world of investing. You're going to want to create a list of individuals, angel investors and funds that meet specific requirements. One of those is knowing whether or not they invest at the stage that your company is at. So there's different ways of looking at that. In the earliest days, it's, pre-seed and seed investors that you want to go after. They're looking for companies that are, pre-revenue or early revenue of a certain amount. Because that was one of the things I, learned the hard way, is talking to investors that were never going to invest in my business because we were, just getting started, and whether or not they liked the idea didn't matter. They have a certain mandate from their investors that they can only invest in certain companies that look a certain way. And so having a list based on the profiles of people that you strategically want, that can invest in you, that tend to invest in you and may have invested in other companies that are like yours. So that was one of the biggest things, is building that list and being really targeted about it. Knowing when the right time for you to raise money is. Critical milestones are important in that equation. So people like to see tractions. They like to see good things happening in your business. So timing your investment to when those good things are happening in the business, or timing those conversations for when good things are happening, is a really good signal to those investors. The other piece is just controlling the narrative. So one of the things that I struggled with in the first time that I raised money was basically I was constantly raising money, and I didn't really control when I was or wasn't. And what that did to investors is I would talk to a specific investor at, let's say January, and, tell them, hey, I'm raising money. And then talk to them a few months later, and it's like, hey, I'm still raising money. And for them, that's a signal that, oh, maybe people aren't interested in this business. So why should I be interested? And there's no FOMO there. There's no kind of time pressure there for them to really get behind it. And so when you can say, hey, I'm not fundraising right now, but I will be next month, and I plan to close this round, within a few months from then, and really line up your meetings to be in a compressed time period. That's a way to start building momentum around the round, getting early commitments that then lead to that ability to share that with other investors and say, hey, I have, this investor and this investor, they're committed, things are moving really quickly throughout this process. And so, Yeah, those are a couple trailers. I could go.
Those are really good.
But those are a couple of things. Is being really targeted, control the narrative, and compress your meetings into a smaller window of time, or do your best to compress your meetings into a smaller period of time. So the first time I raised money, it took me probably over a year to complete that. We raised $600,000 in that closed in the beginning of the year, but that took a lot of time and effort over the course of basically a full year before that. And now we're it's not announced yet, or it may, depending on the timing of this, like we'll be closing around here soon. That took less than a couple, effectively less than a couple of months to close. And so the difference was kind of those things that I just mentioned.
That is good advice. I mean, that's such a good insight, because it's like it's good to have a great idea, but it just doesn't stop there. And how people perceive your brand, your company is very much so a part of the equation as well. Yeah, so I think it's great to be transparent about that, because I did not think of that.
Yeah, it's one of it's as a startup founder, it's one of the most important jobs that you have. It's not my favorite, but being good at it or being able to execute on fundraising can literally be the difference between life and death at your company. So it's an important thing to understand, and understand the motivations of, the investors, understand what your motivations are and how those things overlap, and how you can, if it is a game, like I was saying, like know how to play the game well, in order to have a good outcome.
Love it. And Darren, you also mentioned the fact that initially, I want to go back to this, that you were paying for things with your credit card. And I think that was great to be transparent. And I also want to ask, do you feel that, even though you said it wasn't, you don't recommend it, do you feel that it was worth it?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, things are still playing out. I hope it all pays off. It's to be determined, but what I've learned over this, especially like kind of where we're at now, and things are not, we're in a better spot with the business, but there's still a lot that we have to prove. But, given where we're at now versus where things were at just a couple of years ago and when we were first getting started, one of the big things I've learned is just perseverance. And so not giving up. And that's a tough thing to reconcile, because some things, you have to understand, like when to cut it off, and when to understand that there's nothing here. But at the same time, I know for a fact, if there's plenty of times throughout the life of Qualifi where we probably could have and probably should have, quit and hung it up. But I'm really glad that we didn't. And so in that way, I'd say it's definitely worth it, to see like where we're at now, to see the effect that it has on our customers and how much they appreciate what we do. That piece is totally worth it.
Love it. Great message there. And okay, so I want to take a shift and talk about what you all are doing and how you all are solving a problem for business owners. But I think it's important to dive into, hiring and recruiting, and why it's important to, spend time on doing these things right. So if you could talk about what it means, hiring versus recruiting, is there a difference?
Yeah. So, I mean, specifically on kind of that difference, I think that's, subject to interpretation in terms of the terminology to use, but effectively, recruiting is often a sales type function, where you are trying to attract people to come work for you. You're trying to sell them on, why they should want to come join your organization, being attractive to them in that way. And then as you get them interested, working them through a process to where you feel comfortable as well, with their ability to produce once they are hired. And so that's kind of that's what the difficulty often is, especially in the world that we live in. We're trying to fix broken processes, and hiring and recruiting is one of those processes that tends to be very broken or very slow and often archaic in a lot of organizations, because it is that kind of dance of, I want you to come work for me, but I also need to prove that you are going to work well, and produce for our team. And so I need to go through these different steps, and those steps often take a long time. And so yeah. And like I said, like what we do is focus on right now at the beginning of that process at the phone interview level, which is a really common step in the hiring process. However, it is actually the slowest step in the hiring process because there's so much coordination that goes into just getting that phone call set up, or you have to play phone tag in order to get time with that candidate. And that's just one candidate. You're doing, the typical average is, 10 candidates to every person that you hire. And so just imagine, how much work it takes to do all those interviews and coordinate all those interviews. So that's kind of where we come into place right now.
Love it. And speaking about what solutions you all are providing. So for a company, let's walk through the process. When do they come to you and begin the outsourcing of this process, and how?
Yeah. So we typically work with internal recruiting teams. Like for that context, there's headhunters, there's staffing agencies that work for work for organizations and provide them candidates and potential hires. But then there's also most organizations, I'd say, have their own recruiting teams that are doing the recruiting. And we typically work with those types of, teams. And for them, we provide this software service that, can connect with their systems, or they can use it out of the box. And like I said, they're typically they hire in larger volumes. So think like hospitals are, one of our biggest kind of segments that we work with. In, especially right now, they're trying to staff like crazy and bring in these candidates. Oftentimes they see a lot of turnover in their organization. And so they're constantly recruiting. And so that's when they kind of turn to us. So they can, free up their recruiters' times and get a lot more done. So before, they might be able to interview 6 to 10 people in any given day, one recruiter being able to interview, phone interview like 6 to 10 people. And now with us, they can send out as many invites as they want, and their time to review them goes down drastically. So instead of 30-minute phone calls, they're able to review candidates in roughly 5 minutes, and they're not bound to their calendar. So they can batch them together. They can, batch and review, or they can, listen to them as they come in, or do them at a different time during the day that makes more sense for them, as opposed to, the confines of their 9 to 5. And same goes to those candidates. Like, candidates aren't often able to take a break from their day-to-day work if they're in a job, or they might not be free when all that to say, calendars are hard to line up. And so candidates can take it, at night when they're free, and recruiters can listen to it in the day when they're free. And so it just makes that process a lot more seamless. And like I said, we're able to help them free up that time and move candidates through the process a lot faster, with the ultimate goal to land your best candidates and hire your best candidates. So that's what we help with.
I love that. And then, so you all basically also, are asking them these questions through your pipeline. So you're asking them the questions, and then so the companies get to listen whenever. So they're just responding to the questions that you're asking them.
Exactly. And it works very similar to, I kind of give you like the full picture. So recruiters go into our platform. They log in and they can record their own sets of questions. So it's actually their voice. And so it creates this really, like I said, a personal and cohesive experience with that organization. So they ask their questions into our platform. They can choose whatever questions from their question bank to create a unique interview for that job. And then they can invite candidates to participate. The candidates will receive a text or an email invitation saying, hey, we got your application. We want to learn more about you. Click this link to get started. That link takes them to an instruction page where they can, simply read the instructions. And when they're ready, there's a start button where they can, enter their phone number that they want to be called, or their phone number might be pre-programmed in. And then they simply hit that start button, confirm, and then our system will dial their phone directly. And from there, they just pick up the phone call. So they can do it over a cell phone. They can do it over the landline. And then the in-call experience is very familiar. It's similar to, navigating voicemail, where they'll hear a question followed by a beep, and then they respond to that question, and then hit pound to go to the next one. And so all that, all the while we're recording those responses. And like I said, we also transcribe those responses too. So the recruiting team can then listen to it, read through it, and they can easily share with their colleagues, with, hiring managers on their team, so they can make decisions a lot faster.
That is so amazing and so innovative. It's like, oh my God, I'm over here like, oh, I love it. And it's making me think also about, your thoughts on the future of what work looks like because of the use of technology. I know you mentioned that you all work with larger companies, but do you see how this could impact smaller companies, or what do you see the future in that?
For one, we at Qualifi are a smaller company. We use it ourselves. It's really enabled us to, startups, everyone's wearing a bunch of hats. We don't have a full-time recruiter. And so this has enabled us to be able to get in the best candidates and really review them, have a structured way that we're approaching reviewing candidates. So, and then we also have clients outside of the larger companies that I mentioned. We have companies that are, I would say, smaller businesses that are kind of in the same boat as us. Just maybe the person that does recruiting does a lot of other things for the organization too, and they just are limited in terms of their time and their capacity. And this frees up their ability to still be productive on recruiting, but also productive in those other areas.
I love it. So I want to talk from the perspective of the listeners. So I'm a small business owner who is listening, and I'm saying that this could be very beneficial for me. This is something that I'm interested in using. What are some of the ways, or how should I prepare in terms of costs, or where should I be in a certain level, I guess?
Yeah, no, for sure. I would say we tend to work best with organizations that know that they're going to have a steady flow of hiring. So you don't necessarily have to be hiring in large volumes, but it's going to make more sense when you're not necessarily hiring for just one or two roles over the course of the year, that, over the course of this year, I'm going to be consistently hiring for the same position. Maybe I'm expecting some turnover, or we're growing and I know that, our team's going to continue to get bigger. So one, I would say that's a good starting point, where you'd want to consider working with us. So that's one lens. The other is, also, if you're just trying to create a more, fair and equitable way that you're approaching your hiring. So innate to what we do is structured. So every candidate is going to get the same exact experience. They're going to get asked the same questions in the same exact way. And it's going to enable you to be able to review candidates on an apples to apples basis. So those are the two lenses that I would look at it from. And from a cost standpoint, we typically base our pricing with customers off of the volume that they're going to see through the platform. And so that can range. The way I would look at it is it usually costs a few bucks per screen through our platform on a subscription basis. And if you look at your time and effort that's going into it, it may be already costing you, around $15 an interview based on your salary or your recruiting team's salary, and the time that they're spending on just the phone interview portion of the recruiting process.
That is definitely worth the time and the money, because like you mentioned before, I think it's, we have to really talk about, especially when people are managing small teams, some ways that we can continue to outsource things. And I think that if this is going to give you the best candidates, I think that is the best route to go. So I love that you all are providing that solution.
I appreciate it.
Of course. And Darrian, what has been, some of the transformative stories that you've seen from companies that are working with you all and who have used your platform?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, so, so I mentioned kind of a hospital setting. So we have a few customers in that space, and there's been some really cool stories because we have a pretty straightforward platform, but everyone's kind of using it in unique ways. One of the best ones is one of our more recent customers shared with us that, again, in their hospital environment, nurse staffing is very difficult right now. so they're nursing managers that kind of lead the nursing teams. They obviously are involved sometimes in the hiring process, but with the shortage of nurses, they get pulled into actual nurse work more often, which makes that strain of, I need more nurses, but I have to do the nursing work. That whole dynamic very difficult. And so Qualifi has been able to help them with their recruiting team keep the nurses, the nurse managers involved in the hiring process without them having to spend too much time with it, and enabling them to get to do that nursing work while there is a shortage. So that's been really cool. We've seen examples of recruiting teams that have actually lost people on their recruiting team. They had like a team of 4 or 5 and lost one of their recruiters, which would have, created a huge burden with the volume that they were, staffing at, for the rest of the recruiting team. And in Qualifi actually helped them save, a full headcount salary because they decided that they were running so efficiently with Qualifi that they didn't need to, hire a new recruiter. The team felt really comfortable with being able to handle the volume because they had Qualifi. And so those are a couple of really cool examples of people that have had success with it. And like I said, those types of stories kind of keep me motivated, and where I see people actually getting value out of what we offer.
I love that. And what do you say, because it also made me think about someone saving someone's whole salary, to people who are saying, I want to talk about the future, but also technology in terms of human replacement. Like, what are your thoughts?
Is it going to take over?
Yeah. So how do you respond to that?
No, yeah, we get that question asked a lot. And for us as a business, our goal isn't to, our goal is to help people hire and get more people in jobs. And the way that we see it is we're giving your existing team superpowers. We're helping them to free up their time so that they can do the more impactful things. Their job isn't necessarily to coordinate calendars and coordinate schedules and be on these phone calls over and over again all day. They have higher ambitions to, build a more attractive, organization from a recruiting standpoint, or get to some of those projects that they haven't been able to. And that's where we come in and help them free up that time to be able to do that. So less about like replacing people and more about enabling those existing people to be more productive in their existing role.
Yeah. And you can also say for people who are like, recruiting, maybe work with Qualifi to make sure, help make this process easier for companies. So recruiting for you all. So for those who are listening, who are small business owners, and they're thinking about, hiring, just some tips, some overall tips, whether you can give for their recruitment and hiring process, how can they make sure that they are efficient? And also whether they're doing it on their own and preparing to work with you all, but also getting prepared to work with you all.
Yeah, I could talk about this all day. But I would say when it comes to the context of interviewing, one of the biggest things that you can do is just be really structured and prepared. Know what you're looking for going in. A lot of people kind of get in their own way with interviews. So kind of remove the emotional and the area of yourself where you might think like, I know what to look for. I can ask my own questions throughout the process. What I'd say is go in with, hey, we're hiring for this specific role. What are the key skill sets? What are the key dynamics that we're looking for in this individual? Let's make sure we ask these specific questions to try to pull those out. And that way you can, have that structured process that I talked about before. And so that you can be consistent throughout your process, and objectively, or in the most objective way, review the candidates that are coming in, because there's a lot of comparison that has to happen in order to make your best hire. So give yourself a leg up by having that structured process of knowing what you're looking for, and asking the appropriate questions the same way to each candidate. So that's something that we practice at Qualifi, is kind of that structured interviewing process, obviously with our product, but also with with the folks that we are, actively recruiting and hiring for. So I think that's one big thing that you can do, and being on the same page with your team is helpful in that process as well. The others utilize different forms of technology. Obviously, Qualifi is one of those elements, but there's different points of friction throughout any given hiring process. Scheduling is one of those. So we help remove scheduling out of the equation. But it's sometimes really difficult to coordinate calendars, to track people down, to get that time with them. And there's different ways that technology can come into place to help, automate some of those things or make it more convenient for candidates to schedule time with you. So tools like Calendly and others are ones that, I use and tend to recommend. So those are a couple of tips in terms of both for, speed and for quality in terms of, outcome that you may want to consider.
Amazing. And do you think there are any cons of recruiting and hiring through technology that you can think of?
Yeah, I'd say depending on like what you are using and what you are, the types of roles that you're using. So some people are, technology averse. That's why we try to make our platform really accessible for any types of candidates to participate in. And so, one of the things that we see that we're most competitive with is like video interviewing platforms, for instance, where, you have to have a webcam, you have to have a good environment to take, an interview in, and maybe there's internet issues that you have to consider. So those are different, friction points that may make it less accessible for some individuals. And then also the visual nature of, a video interview, for instance, can lend itself to bias, and it can be problematic in a lot of ways. And so that's one instance of, where technology, where you have to understand the dynamics of what who you're looking for in the context of your organization. That's an example. And there tends to be a lot of concerns around, AI and machine learning, things of that nature in the context of recruiting. And so I'd say, be cautious be cautious about how you're implementing technology and what that technology is doing in terms of, is it evaluating your candidates in the proper way or in line with, what your beliefs are in terms of recruiting. And so, yeah, those would be considerations I'd have, or examples of, the limitations of what technology can do for you.
Agreed. And what do you foresee the future being for Qualifi? Like, what does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, right now we are, we're really excited. We're at a really, critical stage of the business. I mentioned that we are, growing our team. So we're going to see some new faces here soon in the mix. And so I'm really excited about that. I love collaborating with people. It's probably my favorite thing about being an entrepreneur. And like I said, at kind of the top of the show, it's about that speed and continuously iterating and getting validation. So we're not stopping with what we're doing right now in the phone interview space. We want to help, provide more insights to recruiting teams, and also do a lot more for those recruiting teams and getting into new areas of the recruitment process. And so, we're growing the team and growing, our reach and impact in terms of what we do from a product standpoint. So I'm excited about that.
Amazing. And also, before we ask a couple of questions about just, one I want to ask, in your journey, what are some favorite tools or resources that you've used that have helped you in your entrepreneurial journey?
That's a good question. Let me think of that. I don't know. That one caught me not off guard, but let me think about that one. Or I may not have a good answer off the top.
Anything that you use on a daily to help manage your calendar, your time?
Oh yeah. Well, okay. So one of the tools that I've started using more recently, there is an expense attached to it, but a lot of my job is tied to email. Literally my job is emailing people, all day, whether it's in the sales context, investor context. A lot of my job is emailing. So one of the tools I found to be really valuable is Superhuman. If anyone's ever used that, they may know about it, but it's essentially a layer on top of Gmail that allows you to move through your inbox a lot faster and allows you to be more productive with email. Like I said, there's it's a subscription, so it's not free like your Gmail is, but as a person that lives in their inbox constantly, I'd say it's a worthwhile investment. So if you're a person that deals with a lot of emails, check out Superhuman. I'd say it's definitely worth it. So yeah.
Love that. I haven't heard of that. So definitely we're going to mention that in the show notes. And any favorite books that have helped you in your journey?
Your favorite books? I'd say one that I tend to recommend is kind of just like a base framework for approaching any new ideas, especially in like a startup context, is Lean Startup. It just gives you a basic framework of how to validate. When we talked about, validation at the very beginning, it gives you a good approach to that and a good outline of, like I said, how to start any new concept, idea, business, and the approach that you should consider, when you're going about, getting that validation and iterating on a process. So yeah.
Okay. And any advice that you would give to anyone in their first year of business?
Any advice? If you're in your first year of business, I'd say perseverance is key. You'd work really hard to get that validation, get people to pay you for, even if it's a service. If you have if you're, envisioning building a software platform that's automated, doing that thing as a service is a good way to, get that validation that there's a, market there. But I would say the advice is to keep going. That's been the difference in my personal story. And so that's, like I said, one of the biggest things I learned is, perseverance is the difference, between life or death, in your company and your idea or anything that you're trying to do in terms of, dreams or ambitions. And so, first year, keep going.
Great advice. That's great advice. And what is the best risk that you've taken?
Best risk that I've taken. I think it's easy to say Qualifi. Yeah, I think that's the best risk. That there's been a couple. I mean, before I think not my whole professional career, but a lot of my professional career has been taking risks. So fresh out of college, I basically joined the finance and accounting department for a relatively large organization. So that wasn't super risky. That was, getting things started. But 2 years into that, my friend, he and I had worked on a side project together and didn't really go anywhere. But then he had another idea that started to take off. And my wife was about 7 months pregnant. And he was like, "Hey, I can pay you a little bit more. There's not going to be any medical benefits, but I want you to come help me, with this full time." And so I did. I took a leap of faith and ended up being able to work there for 3 years. And that's where I got a lot of my experience in the startup world. And it led to what I'm doing now. And then Qualifi was a huge risk. I kind of talked about that at the beginning, but I left, that previous company at a time where, my income wasn't guaranteed and there's a lot of uncertainty. So that was a huge risk. And it's starting to, prove to pay off now. So those are a couple.
Great message. Great message. And Darrian, what does it mean for you to be Black in business?
It means a lot. I try to, especially where I live, there's not a ton of companies that look like mine, where there's, a Black founder, a Black CEO, and a group of Black founders in a diverse company overall. And so it means a lot. Like, that's one thing that we pride ourselves on is showcasing that, yes, we look the way that we do and we are killing it. And so that's what I hope to be as an example, not me personally, but just as a company. I want to show and prove that you can build a diverse company and have a lot of success because of it, if not despite it. So, yeah.
Great message. Great message. So this has been amazing. And I'm sure people are wondering, how can they stay connected with you? How can they support you?
if you could just share the information.
Yeah, I would love for you guys to all come find us at our website. It's Qualifi, spelled with an I, so QUALIFI.HR, so qualifi.HR. And then you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably where I'm most active. And it's pretty simple, I think, to find me. I think I'm one of one in the world, so it's just hopefully be in the show notes. But yes. Darrian Mikell, come find me there.
Amazing. Well, Darrian, thank you so much for being on the show. And this was full of gems. So thank you for being transparent and sharing with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again for having me. I'm happy to do it again.
Of course.
I just love how transparent Darrian was in sharing his journey and how he and his team have been able to build such a powerful solution. Being the leader of your business, your role as the visionary is crucial for the success of your business. This means that you have to use your time efficiently and be effective. So it's important to have people on your team who are qualified, who you can trust, and who are flexible enough to take on diverse responsibilities until you can expand further. It's a process which takes time. My advice to you after this conversation is to start envisioning your dream team now, so that you're prepared when it's time to hire. And I encourage you to outsource to solutions like Qualifi if it's within your budget, so that you can spend more time on your business vision and working on and not in your business. Thanks so much for listening, family, and visit blacktobusiness.com/68 for full show notes and resources mentioned during this episode. And if you haven't already, follow this podcast, rate the show, and share with a friend. See you next week.